But true healing actually needs to go much deeper. It comes to a place where there's forgiveness that needs to happen, and forgiveness is not something you can mentally do, which is why someone will say, oh, just forgive the person, it's better for you, move on. But that's not actually something you can just do. It actually takes time for you to get a point in your healing where you actually do forgive, and it comes from your heart. So what I realized for me was that I hadn't actually forgiven myself. I hadn't actually gotten to a point where I'd forgiven myself for certain things that happened in my teenage years. And I had actually just rationalized everything. I was like, well, because this happened, it's okay that I did all of these things, and we have to, there's a lot of shame sometimes around those years of our lives. We're still forming ourselves. We're still trying to work out who we are. We make mistakes. We hurt people. People hurt us. It's a time of many firsts.
Welcome to the Wildflower Diaries Show, where we have meaningful conversations and contemplations to bring you back to life. I'm Beth, your host and guide, to help you along your healing journey and to really start living life fully. We have forgotten that we are the builders, creators, weavers, lovers, visionaries and dreamers. Through these discussions, learn and implement practices to remember and reconnect to all of who you are. Your body, intuition, power, heart, voice, mind and magic are ready to be reclaimed so that you can make ripple effects of change that you know deep down you are made for. Let's get started with this week's episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wildflower Diaries Show. And yeah, I'm excited about this one because it's something I have been moving through myself personally in the last few months. And what I wanted to speak about today was sort of healing and reclaiming the inner teenager. So some people, if you are into the woman's healing, I call it the Maiden. The inner teenager is this part of ourselves that often needs healing, and I wanted to speak a bit more about how to go about healing the inner teenager, and a bit about my own experience of how that came up for me in a big way in the last few months. So yeah, let's get into it. So firstly, how that sort of came about. First thing for me, what I find is there'll be something really like ordinary, like watching a TV show, and then I start to feel a little bit of like obsessive about it and start to like look into things. And this summer I started watching this program called The Summer Turned Pretty, which is a show about a sort of love triangle, and people are really into it. It's like I started looking into it afterwards, and everyone's either team Conrad, team Jeremiah, breaking it down, explaining what they think, speaking about red flags. And I found it super interesting. I always like to go into sort of like human nature around these things as well. And but it sparked something in me. So whenever something sparks something in me, I know there's something there for me for my own healing as well. So it was The Summer Turned Pretty. And then on Netflix, there's also been the last season of a program called Sex Education, which is also about sort of teenagers, also another sort of smaller love triangle. And both of them sparked a lot of things around my teenage years. So what came up for me in a big way was how often we have shamed our inner teen and pushed our inner teen away, really. This is a time of our life, where we go through different stages of development. And there's the 1 to 7 years where we're sort of physically developing. We're very close to spirit around that time. So you'll find very small children are very close to spirit. They speak about things sometimes in a way we can't quite grasp. And a lot of our sort of core inner wounds can form when we're smaller at that age, and a lot of our belief systems start to already develop around that age when first things happen and we make meaning of them. So I find a lot of times when we go, when I work with people, it's inner child healing that we go to first, because it's innocence, and it's easier for us to look at an innocent child and be able to forgive them or help them see things differently, so that we as adults can see things differently in our own lives. So that 1 to 7 years is often an easier thing to look at, when it comes to it's not easy, because obviously sometimes bad things have happened, but it's easier for us to forgive and to understand or be there for a small child within us. So when you hear about inner child healing, it often goes back to those years, sometimes to the next stage of development, but it's often those years. And what I found also, so my daughter is 6 and like very close to spirit. She's often spoken to us about her land, where she came from, before she came to Earth. She told us how she's an expert, and I said to her, babes, being an expert's great, but you've also got to be open to learning, because otherwise, you can cut yourself off from learning new things. And she's like, Mama, no, though. Before I came to Earth, they told me everything I needed to know. So I was like, okay, so they definitely know things around that age that we tend to then forget, and our imagination starts to fade a little bit in the next phases of development. So after that, then you've got like 7 to 14. So it's your tween years and developing out of being a young child. And often during this phase, this is when our emotional development happens. So a lot of things can happen within that time period, and then it forms how we emotionally experience life afterwards. So a lot of how we emotionally experience things will be set during those years. And myself personally, I went through something quite traumatic during that time period, which then had a knock-on effect onto the rest of my life afterwards. And this is something that has obviously come up a lot in my own healing journey. After that, you've got your 14 to 21, so your teen years. This is when you start to also develop mentally, and you start to also develop your mental ways of protecting yourself. So I'll speak about that a bit more as we go into it, but we do start to form more of your mental way of dealing with things during that time period. And then you actually then have another 21 to 28, and people think that we are adults at 21. However, your mind hasn't fully developed up until 28, actually. We're still actually developing our minds up until 28. So a lot of things can still happen during that period that have a serious effect. And what I've also found is a lot of people start coming to me around 28, 29, 30 after that mental development has finalized, and when you almost go through your sort of Saturn return, and you go through this period of upheaval, where all of a sudden everything that you believe to be true, you want to question it. So I found, a lot of people don't realize that there's still a lot of formative things happening for us during that time period, which can also be a very upheavaling time period in your early 20s, when you're depending on which path you took. Some people were already having children around that age. Some people were starting their careers. There's a lot of things that also still happen during that time period that where our mind's still not fully developed. So just to give you kind of an idea of the times, the development periods of what I'm discussing now. So I'm now looking in a teen around stuff that can sometimes happen between your 7 to 14, so your early teens, maybe towards the sort of 11, 12, 13, 14, and then obviously all the way to 21. But don't discount things that have happened to you in your 20s, is what I'd like to say, when taking this into consideration when I go deeper into it. So what I found came up for me is, I had been through this traumatic event in my early teens, even before my early teens. I was about 11, 12. And the more I've understood what had happened, I went through sort of a deep healing journey. And I started to rationalize my healing. So most people, when you start to go and heal and realize you need to heal, it's because we think there's something wrong. And many of us have beliefs that there's something wrong with us, that I'm not good enough. You'll go through a sort of turbulent time, and you'll all of a sudden just feel like I need to do something about this. And for me personally, it was to fix myself in the beginning. It really was like something wrong with me. I can't get it right. I need to go and heal and fix myself. So the energy starts off in that sense, and because we've been taught to think about things, specifically in the Western world, is like we've rationalized most of our lives. And it means that often we rationalize our healing journey as well. But true healing actually needs to go much deeper. It comes to a place where there's forgiveness that needs to happen, and forgiveness is not something you can mentally do, which is why someone will say, oh, just forgive the person, it's better for you, move on. But that's not actually something you can just do. It actually takes time for you to get a point in your healing where you actually do forgive, and it comes from your heart. So what I realized for me was that I hadn't actually forgiven myself. I hadn't actually gotten to a point where I'd forgiven myself for certain things that happened in my teenage years. And I had actually just rationalized everything. I was like, well, because this happened, it's okay that I did all of these things, and there's a lot of shame sometimes around those years of our lives. We're still forming ourselves. We're still trying to work out who we are. We make mistakes. We hurt people hurt us. It's a time of many firsts. So we go through all of these first heartbreaks, first sometimes abandonment, depending on whether that happened earlier or not. So we go through many firsts during that time period, and it can turn out that we've shamed ourselves for certain ways we behaved, or we were shamed by others for ways that we behaved. And we hold that shame. Specifically, I find a lot in those teenage years, we hold so much of that shame and we bring it into our adult lives. And I was holding on to a lot of shame about certain things that had happened, and I'd rationalized it. So I was like, well, it's fine. I went through that, so it makes sense why I did that. So I'll just put it to one side and I'll carry on. But it came to a point when it's like, no, you can no longer do that, because you're not forgiving yourself. You're not letting that shame go. And because you're not letting that shame go, you're stopping yourself from speaking, and you've taken that part of yourself and you've completely pushed it to one side. And the inner teen has many, many gifts that we can bring with us once we've healed that part of ourselves, because it's a time where we start to rebel against the world, and some people were allowed, had the space to rebel. Some people did not have the space to rebel. So there's an energy to that inner teen that we need to bring with us, to that maiden that we need to bring with us into our adult lives. And often we're bringing it with us from the unhealed part of it. So what I found is I got to a point where I had to be like, I'm no longer actually going to rationalize what happened. And I need to start asking this part of myself, what does it need? And what did I need to hear for me to be able to start integrating this within myself and using these gifts? And what I needed to hear was that I did nothing wrong. I made mistakes. Things didn't always work out the way they should have. I froze in certain situations. I didn't know how to deal with certain things. And that's okay. I didn't actually do anything wrong. I wasn't bad. There wasn't something wrong with me. I was okay to forgive myself and really start to forgive myself. And it had such a shift within me when I started to realize how I had taken that part of me and literally put it to one side. And I think this also came about because I've been through a big change. So I'd moved, and when moving, I found a diary, which I'm going to read a couple parts from it, that I'd written during my, I think I'm 19, so later teens, but I went through a very dark period. where I went very like downhill, very depressed. And that happened to me up and down actually throughout my teens, but very much into my 20s afterwards. And was partly also why I ended up going on a deeper healing journey at some point, So that was part of it. And then I was also pregnant. Okay, so babies have a way of bringing up everything for you, and this baby was really has helped me look at this part of myself and hold space for that, which I'll speak about a bit more about afterwards. But that was it. Forgiveness was the first step. So if you start to see that there's something with your inner teen, really it's like, what does this part of you really need to hear? What do you need to tell it, and how are you really going to forgive it yourself for the things you've done that maybe you feel are unforgivable? Or how are you going to forgive yourself for the times you froze when you actually wanted to say no? How are you going to forgive yourself for letting people take your voice away? Those are the things that we need to really be looking at with this inner teen energy. So before we start moving on, I just actually wanted to read a couple things of wisdom that I got from my reading the story. So this was a poem. I think I must have found it in a magazine. I used to like to write random poems down. So it says, screw them, screw everyone who said it couldn't be done just because they never managed to. Screw everyone who tried to make you feel weak because it was the only way that they could feel strong. Screw everyone who tried to make you act different, talk different, dress different, be different, because they didn't understand that if you couldn't be who you had to be, you were screwed. So this is really where I wanted to go into a bit more about rebellion, because I think the inner teen, why it's worth healing the inner teen is also to look at that sort of time of our life is when we start to question things a lot more. And it can either be met with not often it's a time when we're fighting with our parents because we are questioning everything. It's a time where we can feel like our voices are not heard, we're misunderstood, we're not listened to. But it is a time for some people, depending on how strict their parents were, where they weren't allowed to rebel at all. And I find what I've found from discussions I've had and what I've seen with others, if you weren't able to rebel during that time period of your life, often it will come out in your later years where you want to react and rebel in your later life. And you see it even in the world, because we're going through a deep inner teen thing at the moment where people are reactive, and that's coming from the unhealed teen who wasn't given a voice and not able to say what they needed to say. And now you get to a certain point in your life where you start to feel anger and rage that came from nowhere. So I find a lot of people start to also then look at starting to heal then, because the anger and the rage just boils up out of nowhere. And we're like, what's wrong with me? Why am I getting so angry all the time? Why am I reacting like this? And it's often coming from that inner teen who wasn't given a voice, wasn't able to rebel, wasn't able to say what it needed to say. And why I believe rebellion is so important is because we're at a stage now where we do need to rebel against what's happening in the world. We do need to rebel against the way the systems have been set up. If all of us were to stand up tomorrow and say we're not going to accept this anymore, there's more people that can actually make a difference than if we wait for the leaders of the world to make a change, for example. But we've been taught to not do that, so we rebel in our own lives, and that can feel very much like rebelling against everyone around us, the anger being not used to make a difference outside, make a difference within and then outwards, but we end up sending our anger in the wrong direction, and often that anger gets sent inwards to ourselves and outwards to the people we love most. And in a higher scale, it's when it gets sent to people outside of us, and it takes away love from our heart, but anger is a powerful emotion that can be used actually to really propel us forward. And if you work on healing your inner teen and see what is this anger, how is my voice being taken away, how do I actually want to use my voice going forward, that is the energy that's really needed in our times, and it's an energy that will move us forward. So don't be afraid of wanting to rebel, but it's how we use that energy that matters. And I found the more that you heal this inner team, where you accept yourself and you start to use your voice and heal your voice, it's easier to actually move forward and use that energy in a loving way instead of it consuming you with anger and rage. So that's another step of what I feel is helpful towards healing in a team. So I spoke a little bit about how that time period of 14 to 21 is when our mental development starts to happen. And a lot of our mental protection mechanisms are started to be formed during that time. So this is also a very important place that we need to be watching for healing, because mental protection can look like denial. So denying what we actually think, what we actually feel. It's easier to push it to one side. It can be deflection. So pushing it out onto other people, projection, reflection, deflection, overthinking, perfectionism, people pleasing. So there's definitely all the ones that, I mean, people pleasing, and some of them have deeper roots sometimes to your inner child, but these mental ways of like overthinking instead of just going out and doing something, having to plan everything, having to make it sure everything's in order. Many of that comes from our inner team, where we had no full control over things. So we had to find ways to protect ourselves. And often these sort of mental things develop during that time period. So that is also, if you find yourself overthinking, if you find yourself in a situation where you're a perfectionist, trying to control everything happening around you, often it's also, if you've done inner child healing and this is still happening, starting to think, what happened in my teenage years that could have formed this? And I think that's often a good place to start investigating, because often these mental, what you call it, protections formed during that time. So for me personally, overthinking was my thing. I could not, everything had to be thought about. And I went around in circles and circles and circles. But that was my way of protecting myself from how I actually really felt. And that is unheard, unseen, not enough, that there's something wrong with me, dirty, all sorts of things. So there was just, during that time, that's a lot of it started to form then, the overthinking. The trauma formed it, but then also things that happened afterwards. Overthinking was my way of trying to control everything that was happening around me. So it's usually an important sign to look at your teenage years, your 20s, because there's often where our mental sort of protection mechanisms start to develop. And I just wanted to read, these are quite personal things that I'm sharing, but I feel like sometimes it's easier for you to see yourself in someone else's story, and see then like, where do I take it from there? So I wanted to share a little excerpt from my diary as well that stood out for me, of why this part of myself needed healing and why I needed to claim this part of myself. So I went overseas at 18, thinking I'd take a gap year. And the interesting thing is, I already knew then that I wanted to study psychology, and I decided not to because I was over emotional, is what I thought. And one of the things that I didn't realize is that my sensitivity was actually one of my biggest gifts that I had tried to push to one side, because it's I hadn't yet developed it in a way that I was able to use it without it overcoming me, which I find a lot of sensitive people struggle with that. But after the first year, I decided to stay on and started working in a bank. And yeah, things developed from there. But that particular year, after the first year, I went through a very dark period. I was drinking too much. I was depressed. I was just had a real low. And at the end of this year, this is what I wrote. So I said, looking at how this year has flown by, it scares me. I've come to realize that I really do know nothing. And people spend their whole lives searching for something that they're probably never going to find. I just feel you have to learn to play the hand that you're dealt. You're allowed to moan about it and wonder why at times, but it's easier to get on with it. Everything happens the way it should, and it's not always fair and not always fun. I haven't seen all of the world like I intended to, and I've made many mistakes along the way. But I saw what I was meant to see, and that has made me grow. I'll never really be able to explain to everyone when I get home what I've learned, but I feel stronger within myself. I'm just the child inside, and a little girl at heart. I still wear my heart on my sleeve. You have to accept who you are before you can deal with anything. And I've realized what I'm all about, and only then could I start to better myself. I've definitely made loads of mistakes, but I've learned how to deal with things. You can't regret anything in life. It's too short for that. And I wouldn't do anything differently if I had the chance. Because each time you fall, you learn how to pick yourself up again. I can't wait to be around my friends again, just to be around people who really appreciate me and will see the way I've grown. And as some moments fade from my mind, I just hope I keep the strength that I found. No one here sees it, as they are too occupied in pointing out what I'm not doing right, that they don't realize I have to do it. And if I did it all right, what would I have learned about life and about myself? And I found something inside that if I had remained at home, it would never have come out. I'm fine and I'm strong enough to face the world. I'm still young, and it will all eventually, and it will all come to me eventually. But this has been the first step in the journey of life. Welcome to the real world, not all fun and games. Yet I've got the strength to go on to the next step, wherever that may be. And God is leading me somewhere, wherever that may be. And He's let me equip myself first so that I can come face what comes next. So let's go. And I found that really interesting after a really tough year that I had then. Like in my memories, I've always thought of just those dark times, and I forgot about all the lessons those dark times actually brought to me and what I learned from those dark times. And I also really learned that it's okay to make mistakes, but the longer we go into our journey, we start to lose that. We start to lose that it's okay to make mistakes. And we often start to try not to make mistakes. And it stunts our growth. It really does. And I think really starting to see that that I needed to integrate that so that I could start taking risks again. Because sometimes it's by just jumping and making the mistakes and trying again, and then still picking ourselves up and trying again, that we actually get where we need to go, because it's developing us into who we need to be for the next stage of our journey. And I think that's really been a huge part of me reclaiming this part of myself, has been that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to take risks, and it's okay that it's not always going to work out, but it's what you take from it and how you learn from it, and that makes a difference. And I find in our sort of later years in life, that's often something we avoid, because we've made mistakes, and sometimes mistakes can actually be a big thing, and they can really change our lives completely. But when you look back and you really see like where it takes you, all those mistakes were actually often pushing us in a different direction, or helping us learn and grow. So reclaiming this part of myself really has made me feel that it's okay to take risks again. It's okay that not everyone's going to agree with you, and it's okay that what I say might not be other people's opinions, and that's all right. Whereas the older we get, sometimes we revert so much back to just being pleasing to others that we lose ourselves along the way. And we need that voice. We need that rebellious voice now. We need that risk taker. We need some to be those people who are willing to put it on the line to make real change in the world. And to let go of, we're not going to go into it fearless, because that would be completely not being human, but it's going into it without letting the fear cripple you, without letting the resistance take over, that really makes a difference. And why I believe it's really important to reclaim this part of yourself. So the other things I wanted to just mention about ways that you can start to also heal this part of yourself is sort of looking at the things that we did when we were younger that we enjoyed. So in those teenagers, the music we listened to. So even now you'll sometimes hear a song that you loved in your teen years, and it just brings that spirit back alive in you. Like, that's the kind of music I'm talking about. You know, even sometimes wearing clothes we used to wear during that time. Just doing things that are not so serious. We tend to get very serious as life continues, and we think that we need to grow up and man up, and we take away this sort of childlike innocence from our inner child and teenage fun that we used to enjoy. You know, life is not meant to just be serious, you know. And so just finding those things that you love during those periods, and even like the stuff like from my journal, asking yourself the questions like, what did I learn during those times? What did I need to hear during those times? Journaling around that really is a great way to kind of see where how we can start freeing that part of ourselves. So asking the question also, how was I shamed? How did I stop using my voice? How did I stop using my rebellious spirit? Those are questions that would be great to kind of journal around when it comes to that. And then the other thing that I found very interesting for me about this is I'm pregnant with a boy, so it's a masculine energy that I'm carrying, and my husband has been a very big part of my healing journey as well. And I found that if you're looking at this from a female perspective, as looking at sort of the maiden, if you want to be looking at it more of the spiritual way of things, is in many fairy tales, there's the story of the girl in the tower and waiting for the prince to come and save her. Okay. And this is actually archetypical, where the girl in the tower actually is often our inner maiden. It's our inner teen that's been trapped in this tower that we've created for ourselves. And what we need to come and save that is actually a healthy masculine energy, either within ourselves or outside of ourselves. I think you need both. You need that healed masculine energy within you and outside of you to hold space for you to actually free this part of yourself. And I really feel, from a spiritual perspective, what I experienced with healing this inner teen and this maiden has come from having that space being held for me, both from my husband, who wasn't my prince in shining armor. He was actually just the one who gave me the space that was safe enough to actually go there. He didn't save me, I saved myself, but he gave me the space to be able to do it. My son has done the same. He's brought these things up within me and helped me be able to see that this part of myself needed to be saved by me. I needed to forgive myself. I needed to accept myself. I needed to reclaim my voice. I needed to step up and rebel against the things that I don't agree with in the world, and be okay about people not liking me for it, because it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. What matters is that I'm living my purpose, and I'm doing that only if I feel that I'm safe enough to do it. And if your inner teen doesn't feel safe, or your inner child doesn't feel safe, or you're never going to go out there and say the things you need to say or do the things you need to do, because you will freeze, or your other people go into fight and flight. Me personally, it was freeze. I would just not be able to push myself through it and move forward because I was frozen. Whereas creating that safe space where you are holding yourself and you've become the inner parent to yourself, and you've given yourself that space where you're holding space for yourself, and you've been able to let go of the shame that, yes, I've made mistakes, yes, I've hurt people, yes, I've done things wrong along the way, but at the end of the day, I have I've always made it, I've always grown from it, and I've always allowed myself to learn from it, and I've now been able to reclaim those lessons and that strength within me to be able to move forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't probably be able to sit here and have this conversation with you about this right now. So to finish off, just going back to the programs that I got a little bit obsessed with, because I think it's quite interesting. The things that come up with pop culture, and how that a lot of people, when they go on to like a healing journey or become spiritual, are like, oh no, we must throw all of these things away, we must not we must stop watching TV, you must do this, you must do that. And to be honest, for me, what I found is a lot of my deepest healing has come from really ordinary everyday life stuff, and it's because I've not tried to transcend being human. I've actually allowed myself to continue to be human, and I think that makes us relatable to other people. Is we are human at the end of the day. We can't pretend we're not. And I found watching The Summer I Turned Pretty, there was this Team Jer, or Team Conrad. A lot of people have gotten quite obsessive about it. A lot of people fighting each other online over who's better. A lot of, like, again, people using sort of therapy talk, which I find interesting, because I think a lot of people have done a lot of like some therapy, and then have done a lot of like watching TikTok videos and Instagram, and think that they know what they're talking about. And I find it quite dangerous, that, but I also feel that a lot of people are trying to learn and grow. But it's also interesting that if you're getting obsessed about this, there's often us seeing ourselves in the story, And if you have watched The Summer I Turned Pretty, like I was Team Jeremiah, in the sense, because I could relate to the fact that I've been with people who are like a Conrad, and have been emotionally unavailable. But a lot of people speak about the fact that Conrad needs to go for therapy and then he will be great. But I actually feel that both those boys that are shown in that show need healing. Like most people in the world need healing. Both of them, one was brought up in the role of the brilliant child, the other was that can't take that role. That role's taken. So usually with our siblings, we'll take one of four roles, and one of them would be the brilliant child, another would be the carer, the rebel, or the sick child. And obviously, in this hypothetical way of looking at things, Conrad's taken the brilliant child, so Jeremiah only has left the carer and the rebellious child to take. That role was left for him. And both people will have been through something that has affected them because of it, because one of them is outwardly emotionally unavailable, so that his healing will be more obvious, where someone who has been the rebellious one, or the carer, has often been through a situation where they hide and mask their feelings and how they truly feel, and I think that's sometimes is much more harder to heal, because you can't see it, compared to it outwardly being like, okay, yes, that guy needs to sort that out. He doesn't know how to communicate. He's got some issues. So ultimately, I actually prefer the ending of of the other program that I got into, which was sex education on Netflix. And reason being also because I really like the humor. Like I lived in the UK for quite some time. It really reminded me of my cousins and his friends, and but I also found the ending more realistic, because everyone right now is arguing over whether it should be Team Jeremiah Endgame or Team Conrad Endgame. And I actually think realistically it should be neither, because if you realistically look at our lives, unless you have a childhood sweetheart that you've spent the rest of your life with, most of us don't end up with our childhood sweethearts. And what I loved about the end of that other show was the fact that they all went off and lived their lives, but it was the gratitude that you have for someone, for opening your heart, for showing you something about yourself. So every failed thing that's happened that has shown you something about yourself, and it's the gratitude for that. That often we when we're stuck still hurting from certain things that we don't need to have, and I found the ending where she was saying that you opened my heart, like really more realistic than you ending up with someone that you've known since your whole life that is like part of your family. And I could go much deeper into the Summer I Turned Pretty, because there's so much to unpack, because it's very interesting when you look at human nature, and you could do the same with all these shows. But yeah, I will keep that for the people on TikTok who enjoy making those videos, because that's not my jam. But I just wanted to share that at the end for anyone who has watched those programs and interested in which team I was on. But anyway, I hope that you find something in this that will help you start to pinpoint if you do need inner team healing. There's obviously each one of these things, it's something to go deeper on, but sometimes you need someone to hold space for that. Only you can tell. Like for me personally, if I need deeper healing, I go and see my healer. If I can deal with it myself, I do. And often that's come from what I've just told you now. And something will be sparked, I'll sit with it. I'll see what does it mean for me. And from there, I slowly start to see what needs to be done and healed and work through it from there. And healing the inner team is important work. It's time for us to start using our voices. The world needs it now more than ever. And it's time to really stand up. And often that comes with finding safety within, so that we can use our voices and rebel against what's happening in the world, and bring up our children in a way where they feel safe to also use their voices, so that we can actually change. Everyone, I think, is at a stage where we look at humanity and we're like, this can't continue like this. So at some point, we're going to have to be able to integrate all of ourselves and become whole, so that we can start speaking from a place of wholeness. So I hope this is a step that can help you do that. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.